Hello and welcome to the Complete Analyst. This video is designed to give you a good working definition for architecture. It's part of our What Is series defining common terms that many analysts need to work with every day. Perhaps one of these is you. Now, I'm not claiming that this is the only correct definition you can use, but perhaps this one will make your life as an analyst just a little bit easier. So, what is an architecture and why should you care? Nearly any time you might be involved in an enterprise level or even unit level change, one of the key early work products to be created is some form of architecture. Sometimes that is also called a design or a blueprint or some other similar term. Like so many other terms like this, there are many different understandings of what this means. The other challenge is that producing an architecture is often a great deal of work, and very often much more than first anticipated. It's a tricky thing to navigate around, and getting it wrong could become quite costly. So let's see if I can provide a good working definition of architecture that might help you. Fortunately, there are some good established standards that can make this, if not easy, a bit easier to cope with. So a great place to start is the TOGAF standard from the Open Group. If you've never heard of TOGAF before, all you need to know for now is that it is the most widely adopted standard available for describing what is commonly called enterprise architecture. Unfortunately for the casual reader or business person, it can be a bit of a pain to decipher and apply, but it does have some useful stuff in it that we can use. So let's have a look at this definition and break it down, and I'll try to be mercifully brief. First, an architecture is formal, meaning that it's not just described using a loose collection of documents, but rather through a formal modeling language, and I'll have more on this later. Second, when it refers to a system, it means more than just IT. It's the full stack, including both business and IT. Look at the phases on the right. A common misconception is that architecture is just about IT, and that's simply not true. Third, the architecture is at a component and relationship level, which is pretty detailed and a hint to the reader that it's not a simple single frame or a high-level model. Architectures can be and commonly are quite large, and I'll have more on this later as well. Fourth, it helps to govern design and evolution, which means it must be useful for downstream work that will actually build something. If it just sits on a shelf or hangs on a wall, there isn't much value in doing it. Here is another overlapping view from the book Enterprise Architecture as Strategy. Hopefully you will see the parallels and differences too. What it refers to here as organizing logic is essentially the same as the structure of the components and relationships referred to by TOGAF. Business processes and IT infrastructure are another summary way of describing the full stack of business information systems and technology, also referred to by TOGAF. The architecture must also reflect the integration and standardization requirements defined in the operating model, and I've added the words strategy and vision to indicate where these are defined. For more information on operating model strategy and operating model vision, please refer to the show notes below. Now, these two definitions might be okay, but they're also a bit of a mouthful. So I'm going to suggest this simpler definition that fuses elements of both. An architecture is a formal, abstract model of organizing logic for business applications, data, and technology. That's still a fair amount to take in, but hopefully this is a bit easier to work with. So perhaps the next few slides will help put this into more context for you. First, when we say that an architecture is a formal abstract model, that implies that it is described using a formal abstract modeling language. One analogy to this is music, which is also described using a formal abstract language we call standard musical notation. Now, any musician will tell you that there's much more to the music than what the notes on the page are saying, but it's still quite useful for communicating the essential elements of what must be played to a very wide range of people over time. In our case, we're going to rely on the most popular standard language called Archimate from the Open Group. To be sure, there are other architecture languages you could use, but I'm going to stick with this one for now. This map shows the major domains and nouns used by that language to describe an architecture. And here you can see a more complete definition of the graphical language with its standard shapes, relationship connectors, icons, and colors. You may want to pause for a moment or go back to the previous frame just to see how these line up. So if you put this all together, what does a formal abstract architecture model look like? Well, sort of like this very simple and incomplete example. Now keep in mind that we're only scratching the surface here, but I'd like you to take away a few key points. First, and this can come as a surprise, Architectures can be very large with many hundreds or even thousands of components and relationships between them. There's a frequent misconception among some analysts that architectures are just high-level work products that can be expressed in a few diagrams. But for any architecture for an enterprise of significant size, that's just not the case. You need to be prepared to deal with significant scale when creating an architecture. Second, you may be wondering where the narrative descriptions and documents have gone. Those things still play an important role for the purpose of explaining and packaging the architecture in forms that are more stakeholder-friendly. But the underlying architecture is still essentially a formal abstract model. Another way to look at architecture is in relation to other representations of the operating model that are created over time. Please see the link videos below for more information on those. But what you see here is that architecture usually follows the vision, which we have described as the first sketch of an architecture, and precedes the design. Now there's going to be lots of iteration, so try not to think of this as a waterfall method, but the general flow from left to right should normally apply. Now there is much more to this that we are exploring in other videos, but just understanding where the architecture fits within the general life cycle is probably good enough for now. To sum up, I realize this can be a bit tricky given how much work an architecture does, but try to work with this definition. An architecture is a formal, abstract model of organizing logic for business, applications, data, and technology. We've also explored how those models are created using formal modeling languages, such as Archimate 3.1, and can become quite large as they take on the scale and complexity of a significant enterprise. It also helps to think of architecture in relationship to strategy, vision, and design. Thinking of it as part of a life cycle can help you put it in the proper context. I hope you found this video to be useful to you, and look in the other links below for more related videos that explore this and other adjacent topics. Thanks for watching.